Greetings from Washington, D.C., and welcome to the next conversation in our virtual museum program series. I am Marcia Ferranto, CEO of the National Law Enforcement Memorial and Museum. Exploring some of our country's most creative and thoughtful solutions to the challenges facing law enforcement is an important part of understanding the full story of American law enforcement, especially when law enforcement in our communities can work together to move the needle on those challenges. We are honored to have this team of experts assembled from the Definition of Insanity PBS documentary to share with us the successes and challenges of the jail diversion program in Miami-Dade County. But before we get started, it is important to note that we are only able to bring this program to you today thanks to the generosity of the team at Target, who has been an event sponsor several times this year for us, not to mention a great supporter of law enforcement. So thank you, Target. A little housekeeping. Attendees, all attendees are muted. If you would like to ask a question, please submit a question through the Q&A tab. Note that everyone in the webinar will be able to see your question. You can upvote questions submitted by other attendees. We will prioritize answering the questions that receive the most votes. A link to the recording of this webinar will be sent to everyone and will also be available on the museum's YouTube channel. Panelists, keep yourselves on mute when you are not talking. So let's begin. Today's program is being moderated by Nancy La Vigne, Vice President for Justice Policy at the Urban Institute, where she publishes research on prisoner reentry, criminal justice technologies, crime prevention, policing, and spatial analysis of crime and criminal behavior. Before joining the Urban Institute, Nancy was founding director of the Crime Mapping Research Center at the National Institute of Justice. Our keynote speaker today is Norman Ornstein. Norm is vice president of the Matthew Harris Ornstein Memorial Foundation, which was the catalyst for the creation of the film, The Definition of Insanity. Norm is a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and contributing editor and writer for The Atlantic. Norm, I'm going to tee it over to you.
Thank you, Marcia. And I really would like to thank the National Law Enforcement Memorial and Museum for doing this, and it could not be more timely. I'm actually speaking to you today, not with the hats that Marcia had mentioned, but as the representative of my family and the Matthew Harris Ornstein Memorial Foundation, which spearheaded the film, The Definition of Insanity. I want to talk to you a little bit about the genesis of the film and also our history in coming into this, and a little bit about the framing for the discussion that we're going to have that will follow. We created our foundation in 2015 following the death accidentally of our son Matthew, who at age 24 had a psychotic break and went through 10 years of struggle with serious mental illness. Matthew, like so many who have serious mental illness, was a brilliant, talented, and extraordinary young man. He was a national champion high school debater, went to Princeton, succeeded there, and went to Hollywood when he had his psychotic break. He went through 10 years of hell, as we did as a family, and we encountered in every single fashion that one can imagine the broken nature of the system we have in the United States for dealing with people with mental illness. And while our son had very few encounters with the criminal justice system, we knew along the way that that was an unusual experience compared to many others. After he died, we created this foundation in his memory, and we decided that one of our major goals would be to try and do whatever we could to contribute to a process so that other families wouldn't have to go through what we went through, and other individuals suffering from mental illness wouldn't have to go through what our son did as well. We did some due diligence. We explored for a while the elements of the mental health system, and along the way encountered Judge Steve Levine at a Kennedy Forum run by Patrick Kennedy in Massachusetts. And over time, we became friends. My wife, Judy Harris, and I went down to Miami and immersed ourselves in the program. And we were blown away by what this one man with an incredibly dedicated team and with the ability to create relationships that had by nature been adversarial into something very different, transformed the way the criminal justice system deals with people with serious mental illness. A system that is still, across the board in most parts of the country, fundamentally broken. And we know by experiences that happen virtually every day that there are encounters between those with serious mental illness and people in law enforcement that don't go well and that end up very badly, and often because of misunderstandings, miscommunications, the lack of an understanding of how to deal with and de-escalate situations that take place. And we also know, and we will get a ton of statistics coming from Judge Levine and others, that our jails are filled with people with mental illness. Probably 40% of those in jail, very substantial proportion with a serious mental illness, often there for long periods of time and often untreated. And this is not a good way to run a system. What Judge Levine has been able to do with his dedicated team and with the support of law enforcement, of the state's attorney, of defense counsel, of people in the jail system as well, and with broad support from the community, has been to find ways to save lives and save money at the same time. That's what we'll be talking about in more detail today. Of course, as we'll see, there are two main components to this program, and we'll, those of you who have seen the film have watched those in action. When we became acquainted with Judge Levine and immersed ourselves in the program, we tried to think of the best way in which we could spread these best practices and develop a broader dialogue around the country to try and make sure that other communities could, consistent with their own needs and their resources, adopt some elements of the programs that we know work and work very well. And we decided with the power of film that the best way to do that was to create a documentary. We went to two talented young filmmakers, Gabe London and Charlie Sadoff. Gabe, who had known our son through school and who had produced, along with Charlie, the path-breaking film, The Mind of Mark DeFriest, about the criminal justice system and mental illness in Florida. And they put together a quite remarkable film focused on the people involved in this great program. And I took it to the public broadcasting system. Having served myself for 6 years on the board of PBS, I knew their dedication to this set of issues and the ability to use their local stations for broader outreach, and went to Sharon Rockefeller, the remarkable president of WETA, the flagship public broadcasting system in Washington, to help us carry this project through. The film was given its debut at the Miami Film Festival on March the 9th to great acclaim, and then broadcast nationally on April 14th on PBS. And as most of you, I hope, have done, you can screen it if you didn't see it originally at pbs.org. Just look for Definition of Insanity. It will be there for some time, and we will take this film around the country. And I would just add in closing that while our focus has been on issues of serious mental illness, and while this program in Miami, in the Miami-Dade 11th Judicial Circuit, is really focused around helping navigate the system and do better for those with serious mental illness who encounter the criminal justice system, we are at a point in this society, in the aftermath of Minneapolis, of Atlanta, and so many other places, where we are going to be searching for ways in which we can navigate through this system better, provide real justice, help those in law enforcement on the front lines deal better with some of their own issues, and be able to deal with empathy and reasoning and understanding to de-escalate situations that otherwise can prove tragic for everyone involved. To help make sure that we do not put people in jail who should not be in jail or who can do so much better for themselves and for the society through other means and other venues. Using some of the elements that we have seen through this remarkable program in Miami, and we'll hear from many of the participants in just a moment, is an avenue for all of us to embrace and work to do better at a time when we know our society needs it badly. And I thank you again very much for the opportunity to be on this program and for the ability to put this remarkable film out there for everybody to see.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Nancy La Vigne. I'm with the Urban Institute in Washington, D.C. We're a nonprofit research organization where I head up the Justice Policy Center there. And as my introduction indicated, I've done a fair amount of work on policing, and I think we can all agree that policing is at a crossroads right now, and it was just such a pleasure and delight to be invited to facilitate this panel so that we can learn about an example, which I think we were talking in a pre-meeting about how this essentially humanizes the badge. There is an example here that you'll be hearing about that shows that officers can learn different strategies and different ways of interacting with members of the public to the benefit of all, to their personal safety and to the safety of the residents that they interact with. So with that, I just want to share that you have an amazing panel of experts before you. If you saw the documentary, you'll know and recognize some of these faces. And I'm going to invite each of them to introduce themselves and share what their role is in the jail diversion program and or the crisis intervention team component of it. And so that you can get a flavor for what this program is if you haven't seen the documentary, or to bring it to life a little bit more for you, even if you have. So with that, I'd like to start by inviting Judge Leifman.
Thank you, and thank you so much for participating today, and we appreciate the opportunity. My name is Steve Leifman. I am a judge in Miami-Dade County, Florida. I've been on the bench for about 23 years. And about 20 years ago, I was getting ready to go on the bench, and I was approached by the assistant public defender and the assistant state attorney. And they asked me if I would speak to a couple whose son was in jail on a case I was about to hear. And it was a low-level misdemeanor case where the gentleman was still in jail. At that time, judges in Florida and throughout the United States had very little training, if any, regarding mental health issues. So this lovely couple came into my chambers. They started to tell me about their son. They told me he was brilliant. He had gone to Harvard. He had a late onset of schizophrenia, and they just didn't know what to do. And I was pretty new at the time, and I knew nothing about these issues. And I made the mistake of promising them that I would get their son help. Well, as I started to go back into the courtroom to handle his case, the mom stopped me and said, "You know, Judge, respectfully, he probably knows more about these issues than you do." And I was a little confused what she was trying to tell me. And she said, "You see, my son is the former head of psychiatry at Jackson Memorial Hospital. And it turned out he was a Harvard-educated psychiatrist who had a late onset of schizophrenia and just disappeared until he ended up getting arrested." And the case really opened up a window to me and our system about everything we were doing wrong. And we were able to put together a group of folks. We had a summit, and we laid out a plan that 20 years later has really turned into a model. And I'm thankful because of the amazing people that I work with that have really been able to turn this into an extraordinary experience. And it's done a lot more than we even anticipated. It has substantially reduced our arrests. It has substantially reduced our police shootings. It has substantially reduced our recidivism rates. And we're really proud of what we've been able to accomplish. And I'm looking forward to talking more about it this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. So I asked you to share your role, but you didn't use the title architect. I think I would call you the architect and implementer. So thank you for that. Let's turn it over to Jenny.
Good afternoon. My name is Jenny Conklin. I'm an assistant state attorney at the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office. My boss, Catherine Fernandez-Rundle, was supposed to be here today, but she was unable to make it, and she sends her regrets. I am the division chief of the treatment courts unit for Miami-Dade County Prosecutor's Office. I'm the person who oversees the attorneys that work in the felony mental health court, and I actually did it myself a couple of years ago, working with Alejandro and his team. Our role in the program, or I guess our role as prosecutors, our goal is to protect the community. And sometimes there's really, really bad criminals out there and they need to go to prison. But there's sometimes people out there who get involved in the criminal justice system because of mental illness, and they are not truly dangerous individuals. And we need to respond appropriately. Not everybody needs to be locked up. And that's where the Felony Mental Health Diversion Program comes in. For individuals with serious mental illness, this is a great resource for our office to make sure that people get the treatment that they need in order to take control of their lives and in order to become upstanding, good law-abiding members of the community. Sometimes they just need a little bit of guidance. For individuals with serious mental illness, a lot of times they need extra assistance and can't make it through prosecution on their own, or not prosecution, but can't make it through probation on their own. And that's where the benefit of the Felony Mental Health Program comes in. Our role in the program, apart from making referrals, when we find out from victims or witnesses or police officers that an individual suffers from a mental illness, we'll refer them to the program, and then once we refer them to the program will determine whether they meet the clinical eligibility, and then that's where we get involved in approving them to participate in the program. We accept individuals into the program, generally speaking, with third-degree or nonviolent second-degree felonies, individuals who have felonies on the lower end of the scale. And we also look at the charges that an individual is facing, the wishes of the victim, and that sort of thing. Our goal is to make sure that we're picking people, or that we're approving people who would be good for the program, who would be a good fit program, and who we believe can benefit from the program, because there is such a demand for the program. There's so many people that want to get in, and we need to make sure that those that really need it and would benefit the most from it could participate in it. Again, it's about protecting the community. And when we can protect the community best, sometimes it's by getting people treatment and making sure that they can become members of the community and succeed.
Thank you, Jenny. Alejandro.
Hello, good afternoon, Nancy, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks. I'm very happy to be part of the panel. My name is Alejandro Aristizabal. I'm the team leader of our Felony Mental Health Diversion Program. I lead a small team of mental health and criminal justice professionals from a number of agencies, and annually we coordinate about 200 persons leaving institutional settings like prisons, jails, hospitals, and helping them reintegrate appropriately into the community. Now, the 200 persons are all living with serious mental illnesses and co-occurring substance use disorders. So it's fair to say I'm a middle manager, often tasked with designing and implementing some of the ideas that our visionaries like Judge Levine have. I think an integral part of our program has to do with the cross-system collaboration that we experience. We've really been able to generate cooperation across the board and been able to intervene at all the critical points that a person goes to as they flow in and out of the criminal justice system. So I'm really happy and proud that I have to lead a team from different agencies. We have probation on our team. We have a probation officer specially assigned to our team for us to work with defendants in the community. We have persons inside the jail in the health setting. Corrections Health has assigned us someone to help us on the team. We also have a corrections counselor. We have staff from the administrative office of the courts, which is my employer. And so it's really cutting edge what we've been able to do here. I know other communities do this well and do have the need. And we've really been able to combine them all together to get our participants in our community safer and improve the quality of life of the people that participate in our program. And that's what my role really entails.
Thank you for that. That sounds like a role where you wear many hats, actually.
Well, we're all on one mission, though, and that's the great part, that we're all going towards community safety and ensuring access to care. Sometimes I even say I lead the 3 judges and the 2 attorneys on our mental health team, but anyone that thinks they could lead 5 attorneys towards one goal is way out of line.
Like herding cats, I imagine. Sergeant Blackerby. You were on mute.
Interesting. It just complicated technology. Can you hear me now? Can everyone hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay, you can hear me now? Oh, okay, I'm sorry about that. Technical glitch. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sergeant John Blackerby of the City Miami Police Department. I am currently in my 23rd year here in the city of Miami, and I am incredibly grateful to have seen the cultural shift that has occurred within my police department as a result of our involvement with the CIT program. The Judge Leifman came in as a judge at roughly the same time I became an officer, and then I was able to see this. Is honestly an incredible coincidence, but an amazing testament to what it is that he has done. I now work in a safer city. I'm safer, and our citizens are safer, I believe, as a direct result of this program. My responsibilities for the CIT program are those of a liaison between the officers and the program and all of its members. So, in essence, as with anything that involves human beings, we have to communicate. We have to send our problems up and down the chain as they occur. So when an officer comes to me with a particular problem as it relates to the CIT program, they need it fixed. So that's where they'll contact me, and then I will be able to provide them with the contacts further up the chain as they're needed. Now that works both ways. When there are issues in the program that have now trickled down to my officers, well, that also needs to be addressed, because as with anything, the mistakes do roll both ways. So when it comes to changes in legislation, I make sure that my people are notified. When it comes to an issue with a particular receiving facility, well, my officers will address it, and then we, through the process, will address it. If we have an individual who is regularly found to be in crisis and they are a danger to the community, well, we'll send this information up the chain, and I'll be a liaison so that I can direct them as to the appropriate people to speak to.
Thank you for that. And last but absolutely not least, Hansi.
Good afternoon, Nancy. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I am a mental health professional. I've been in the field for 25 years. I was afforded the opportunity to work with Judge Steve Leifman and our team 17 years ago. I serve as the CIT coordinator for Miami-Dade County and our police mental health collaboration with the 11th Judicial Circuit Criminal Mental Health Project. I am also honored to serve on the board of directors for CIT International. We have over 3,000 CIT programs in the US and beyond, and I'm sure that some of our listeners today are part of the CIT community in their own areas. CIT is all about mental health solution to a mental health crisis. It's about systems transformation. It serves as a platform, a community platform that brings all of its partners, key stakeholders, advocates, the community together. My role is to keep my finger on the pulse of our community and ensure that we identify any of those gaps and barriers in our community. We troubleshoot, streamline, bringing the right people, the right entities together so we can sit at the table and find a solution. It seems that for forever, we've been working in silos, in our own silos, trying to do the same thing for the same people in our own community. Well, CIT breaks those barriers and brings everyone together so we can together meet the needs of people with mental illnesses in our community. There are many core elements, several core elements to CIT, and many know it as the gold standard of training for police officers. But it is also much more than just training. It's also about, as I mentioned, those partnerships, research, developing policies and procedures. Here in Miami-Dade County, we have 36 police agencies. And thankfully, we have every police agency in Miami-Dade County on board with CIT, along with all of our mental health community, our government agencies as well. And CIT, we offer a 40-hour specialized training for police officers that assists them to better understand mental illness, how to communicate, how to de-escalate, how to access our own community resources and navigate through the system, and to divert to treatment as necessary. Unfortunately, on all levels, government, mental health community, society, we have failed law enforcement. We have in the past not provided them with the tools and the resources. And now I can very proudly say that we are in Miami-Dade County, throughout all these years of collaboration and training and education and partnerships, police are very good at assessing, at de-escalating, at diverting to treatment. And we need to continue to pull together so we can have a vibrant system of care that everyone can access, and we can stop this vicious cycle.
Thank you so much. So one of my favorite things about being a facilitator is that I'm a very inquisitive person, and it's such a delight that I get to ask questions that I want to ask of the distinguished panelists. But I do want to remind you that after a few minutes, say 15 or so, we'll be taking questions from the audience. So please be patient, and also as you're composing your questions that you can use through the Q&A function on Zoom, if you hear answered while we're talking, maybe craft a new one. So let's start with, I think, one of the biggest philosophical components of the success story, and that is the notion of decriminalizing mental illness. And I'm wondering if Jenny and Judge Leifman, if one or both of you can share, how you got people to think differently about people with mental illness who are so often just grouped in as people who commit offenses. They get jailed and incarcerated disproportionately. They are often homeless. And so I'm just wondering, what were the strategies? What was the process to bring people in the court and the prosecutor's office along in this notion of decriminalizing mental illness?
Jenny, you want to start?
I'll defer to you if you'd like to start, but I can give my thoughts as to it, whatever.
Sure, go ahead.
Oh, so when people, by the time the cases come to us, there's already been something that happened in the community, and somehow there's been a crime that's been committed. And if you just look at it just on the criminal basis, just there's been a crime that's committed, does it meet the requirements? Yes. And do there need to be consequences for this crime? Yes, there need to be consequences. But if we just put people in jail, or we just put people in prison, or just do something like that, like the law prescribes, the criminal punishment codes and that sort of thing, we're just going to get people coming back to us the same way that they went in, if not worse. And when I speak to victims and witnesses and talk to them about trying to get them to approve treatment as an option for individuals, I'll tell them if we put them in custody, they're going to come back out just the same way or worse. Let's give them the opportunity to get treatment, get help, and let's see if we can affect some change so that this won't happen again. And if you explain it to people in that terms, and when you talk to people about it in that terms, it makes sense. A lot of our individuals that we deal with don't have significant criminal records, and they're not individuals that commit violent crimes. Most of the times our witnesses and our victims are telling us, this person needs help. Can you make sure that they get help? So I think the community is becoming more and more aware of mental illness and the effect of mental illness on people's behavior. And the great thing about the program is I've worked in the program, and it's a great program. The program works. The people that work in the program do an amazing job, and I trust them. And I can convey that to people in the community that, when I'm talking to my victims or my witnesses, it's a great program. Mm-hmm. It will decrease recidivism. Let's do something different. Let's give this person a chance, and let's see if we can fix this so that it doesn't happen again. And give them the opportunity to change.
So
yes, Judge, please.
And I really appreciate the question, because there's so much misinformation about these issues. And so your question is so poignant. We started really slow, and we started with a summit. And it wasn't really telling anybody what they should do. We had to educate everybody about these issues first. And we literally spent 2 days in a meeting with the state attorney and a facilitator and all the other stakeholders. And we first mapped out the intersection between our community mental health system and our criminal justice system. And we saw these massive gaps. And we saw that the same people were recycling again and again and again. And what we decided to do, because this hadn't been done anywhere before, is we would start slow. So our initial diversion program was just nonviolent misdemeanor cases. And within a 2-year span, the recidivism rate in the misdemeanor division dropped from over 70% to 20%. And at that point, the state attorney realized, hey, this is how we really improve public safety, because these folks are ill. And look, if someone has Alzheimer's or dementia and they do something strange or bizarre, we don't throw them in jail. I don't know why we're throwing people with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder in jail if they're not dangerous. And so we started to have that understanding and that discussion. And the other point I would make is we really have two choices. Statistically, I think 98, 99% of people with mental illnesses who get arrested are released at some point. They're not committing such heinous offenses that they go to prison for long periods of time. So we have two choices. We could release people with treatment, or we can release people without treatment. And we know what happens if we release them without treatment. And so the data now has caught up to us. And we also have a lot of data that shows us for people that are not high risk, 1 or 2 days in jail increases recidivism rates by almost 40%. And so we're not accomplishing anything except spending a lot of taxpayer money, making people sicker, and making crime worse by the way we were doing it. And so this has changed that whole dynamic.
Yeah. And it occurs to me too that, just in the last decade alone, general public awareness of mental illness has changed, and it's been destigmatized. And, I'd venture to say that like everyone on this panel is close to someone or has a family member, an extended family member who has experienced some form of mental illness, maybe even themselves, right? So just like having that destigmatization, I think must have helped along the way.
Yeah, it's creating a cultural shift. And
yeah.
Now, even we can look at our data from police arrest, which we'll get into later, but you're now the cool police officer if you get pushed or hit by somebody with a mental illness and you don't make the arrest. And we can see it in the data. And so there's
That's
this
like flipping the narrative. I love it.
And it's really exciting.
I'm going to pitch my next question to Alejandro, because in watching the documentary, I made note of the fact that compliance with meds is often an issue or a challenge. Samsa, you'll probably know about this too. You might want to weigh in. As well as just like the likelihood of relapse, like relapse happens. And I'm wondering if you can just share your perspective on how you handle those issues.
Usually we're handling all our cases on an individualized basis. So before we enroll you in our project, we have a pretty good understanding because we've used empirically validated assessment tools, and they give us an understanding of your risk level of reoffend, your likelihood of reoffending, as well as the severity of your substance use disorder. And a lot of the decisions we are making are based on that, and making sure that you're not punishing someone in the program because they relapsed on drugs. We understand that that is part of recovery, but you do hold them accountable for things that can easily be done, such as going to an appointment. And this is something that we learn in the field called proximal and distal goals. And we take those into consideration. The goal right now is getting you to see the doctor. The long-term goal will be for you to stay clean and sober off of drugs and stay out of the hospital. But our team really works on an individualized basis, and we're very fortunate that we implemented these assessments and tools years ago, and it really helps the whole team, including the judges and the attorneys, on a regular basis. We're case conferencing, and they have access, and we're all looking at the same data. It's really data-driven, where we understand our clients and what their needs are because we've been able to implement these processes.
Alejandro, can you mention the role of the peers and how they play a role in that as well?
The peers are huge, and that's something that I had in my notes to discuss a little later, is a piece of advice to all projects out there. You want to have peer input at all stages of your program. You want to have the peers help in the design of your program. You want to help peers review your program. And that's what we have been able to do for years. I've been with the project 16 years. Yes.
Can you define peers? Who are peers?
Thank you. Yes. We define peers as persons with a unique lived experience with the mental health system, with the substance abuse system, and or the criminal justice system. So we actually employ, and you see Justin is our super peer. You also see Walter, Julie, a couple of our peers come out in the film, Leah, and what they have an experience and a unique relationship with the clients that none of us could really have. They have been in recovery, they are engaged, and they are now helping us engage others and show them that recovery is possible. And not only that, they keep the staff in check as well. They really are our eyes and ears on the ground, and they're the pulse of how our whole caseload is doing.
Yeah. In the research literature, we often call them credible messengers, people that the clients will understand and relate to and listen to. Hazi, did you have anything to add?
Yes, and in one word, education, because it's not just about medication, it's treatment. It's not just off their meds, it's about treatment. And so one of the very common barriers to the revolving door, of course, is not just the lack of funding, but it's the lack of insight of individuals. And so platforms like the National Alliance on Mental Illness is a resource that our officers as well use and learn about, so they can, okay, this person doesn't recognize that there's a mental illness, that they're in crisis. Well, okay, they're meeting our criteria for involuntary hold, but I'm also going to provide them with the resources for education in the future, or else they're back out and, you know, the revolving door continues.
Nancy, can I just real quick add on that? Because I think medication compliance is so important. I think most people think if people just take their medication, they're going to be fine and they're going to recover. We also have to address some of the social determinants that come with that. If they're still homeless, if they still have a substance use issue, the medication is not going to mean a whole lot to them. And what we found is for so many of the people that first come into our program, they have clinical depression on top of their serious mental illness. It's not that they don't want to take their medication. They don't care if they're breathing that day. And one of the things that the peers help us do is develop relationships with people that helps incentivize them to want to start to get better. It's elegant and simple, but it's more complicated than most people realize.
If I could build on what everybody said, at least for our office, you know, we have participants who, you know, come into felony mental health court, and they'll start experiencing symptoms and they'll do something unusual, or they'll use a substance to try and deal with things, to affect their symptoms or different things like that. And what we know about mental illness is that it's cyclical. And even if you're on medications, things can happen, and sometimes symptoms will come back a little bit more, sometimes they'll go away. And a lot of the individuals that we work with and that we really target in this, the felony mental health program at least, is individuals who are newer to experiencing these mental health symptoms and experiencing life with a mental illness. And part of a relapse is it's a tool, I guess, or what we do when we deal with relapse is try and get them to develop insight into the relapse. What triggered a relapse if they used substances, and to try and get them to develop insight into it. If they're starting to experience symptoms again, try and help them to become aware of what's causing them to experience their symptoms again. Because just the fact that they might have, fallen back a little bit in their path doesn't mean that they're not on the right path. Sometimes they just need assistance. And that's the wonderful part of this program, is that the court's there every day to make, or on a monthly basis to make sure that people are engaged and developing this understanding, and the peers are there, and everybody's involved to help these individuals learn to understand these triggers and their symptoms, and come to terms with dealing with them on a long-term basis.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and invite Sergeant Blackerby to share more about what he's experienced and observed around getting officers bought into this, because as we all know, they're on the front lines and they're interacting with folks in the community who are in crisis.
Well, I'll tell you that Hobsy certainly has more experience with the pushback because of her experience as an educator of law enforcement. What I will tell you about my own experience is that the overall cultural shift that has occurred in my agency since I've been here has been really profound. And as Judge Leifman has mentioned previously, there's what officers used to look at as, well, this situation is one where I have to use force. They're now given accolades for not using force. And because we've adopted this program so fully, and it's so integrated into our police department, what I have noticed personally is that, as I have put before, individuals who are accustomed to being policed, they come in and out of the program on out of law enforcement's hands frequently. When they come into the city of Miami and they are addressed by law enforcement officers here, while being policed, they often come back with a very positive response. Whereas, and they will straight out say, I dealt with X law enforcement agency, and X law enforcement agency didn't treat me like a person. You still did your job, officer, but you treated me like a person. And that is something that I can 100% guarantee is something that came as a result of this program.
Yes. And if I may, it's really important to let our audience understand that you'll find, because of the overwhelming need and demand for law enforcement agencies to train officers on a multitude of facets of information and need, at times there may be a law enforcement agency that will want to cut down the training to less than 40 hours. Or train everyone because it's the gold standard of training. It's not a train-all model, and CIT training is 40 hours. And that's where you have the time and the platform to make true transformational changes in attitudes, in beliefs, expand knowledge of diversity. You need the 40 hours.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I'm going to stick with Sergeant Blackerby a little bit longer, because I've had the pleasure of having 2 conversations with this group prior to this webinar. And one of the things that came up that wasn't featured in the documentary was the issue of officer wellness and officer safety, and how those two things interact with this program in ways that benefit both officers and the public.
That same cultural shift that occurred with the way the way the police department interacts with the public, I've seen that addressed twofold within my agency. There was a time when I got on, you simply didn't discuss the stress and the strains that you were dealing with. And what has happened, especially within the last 10 years, is the culture has become more popular and more accepted, is that we are beginning to talk about employee assistance programs. You're getting more support from the staff. There is more discussion about the general wellness of the officers. There's more discussion with supervisors about to ensure that their officers' well-being, both mentally and physically, is being addressed. It's made a tremendous difference because it's far easier to come to work when you know that the people that are behind you have your back, that they're supporting you in a way that I just didn't feel when I got on. It was a different agency when I started, and what's happened has been truly amazing, and I'm glad to be part of it.
So officer wellness is critical for officer wellness, number one, but also for how officers interact with members of the community, and think about, de-escalation. And so that was the connection we talked about. Thank you, Sergeant.
Mm-hmm.
Judge, you had something to add to that.
Yeah, I did, because it's just so important, and I think it's one of the things that we initially overlooked to our peril, which was wrong. And that was looking from the officer's perspective and making sure that they were well. One of the most interesting studies I saw actually happened after Ferguson. And they did a real deep dive into excessive use of force. And what they found is that most of the cases that involved excessive use of force by police officers actually were happening after the officer had left a traumatic scene. And another study that is so critically important, and people need to understand, trauma is physiological. It's not an emotional response. It's actually a chemical change in the brain. And police officers, and it's caused by a chemical called cortisol, and police officers and law enforcement officers get 6 to 9 times more cortisol a day than we do. And so they may be on a really difficult situation. They may be vets that had PTSD coming into the departments, getting re-traumatized. They may be getting traumatized in the department from horrible situations that they've seen, and we haven't addressed it. And then they go out and something happens and there's a difficult scene, and they may overreact because we're not dealing with their own wellness. And now that we're understanding that, and Hopsy will tell you, she gets 150 calls a month from police officers for their own personal mental health issues in Miami-Dade County. And when we first started, we realized they wouldn't go to their own departments for help. So with the permission of the police chiefs, she now refers them to treatment outside the department. And I think it's also given them more empathy and understanding of the people they're now dealing with on the streets. I mean, we need to remember that tragically last year, more police officers died from suicide than in the line of duty. They have high suicide rates, they have high domestic violence rates, they have high substance use rates, and they have high divorce rates. And most of it's due to PTSD that's gone untreated or unrecognized. And it's really critical we start to have that dialogue. And I think if we do that, we're going to get better outcomes for everybody, and we're going to have happier and healthy communities.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one last question and then open it up to audience questions. I'll probably end up kicking it back to you, Judge, but this is a very complex program you have that involves a lot of different actors and a substantial amount of coordination, and it sounds really expensive. And I can see watching this and getting excited about it and going back to my agency and saying we should implement this, and like all my boss can see are dollar signs. So I'm wondering, maybe starting with you, Judge, how expensive is it and what's the return on investment?
Sure, thank you. When we started, we had no money. And after we did this mapping, I was embarrassed to even ask for money because we weren't utilizing existing services that were in place. And coordinating wasn't about creating a new program with new services. It was accessing existing services. So for 2 years, we had no budget. And what we did is we then applied for a federal grant through Samsa. And our county said, look, if you can show us that this is going to show some financial benefits, we will pick up the grant after it runs out. And within very short periods of time, we saw the number of arrests go down substantially. In fact, they've gone down from 118,000 when we started to 53,000 today. Our jail audit went down from 7,300 to 4,000. It enabled us to close an actual jail at a real savings of $12 million a year. It's been closed 7 years. It's $84 million of new dollars back into the county's budget. The city of Miami was able to get its bond ratings improved, which saved taxpayers hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. Why? Because their shootings went down so substantially as a result of the training. We've saved over 300 years of jail bed days just by having the CIT program. Another 84 years of jail bed days by having the felony diversion program. And we keep a lot of stats on all of this. And so right now we have a budget, and I don't want anybody to get nervous about it. It's grown over the years because we have a staff of 25 people. You don't need necessarily staffs that large to get started, but it's about $1 million a year to maintain. But for the county, that's cheap compared to what they were spending on jail costs, liability, civil liability, police injuries, loss of work time because of police injuries, worker comp claims. All of those have gone down like 100%. So it actually is a saver for the community as opposed to a major cost.
It sounds like the program more than pays for itself.
Easily, immediately too.
Right. Yeah, that's terrific. So I have the top 6 questions that we got through the Q&A function on Zoom. I'm going to start with the first one. We touched on it a little bit, but maybe we can dig a little bit deeper. Can you explain how you're educating police officers on how to manage their own mental health as they continue to serve? As you indicated, there's many ways that law enforcement have not had proper support. So what specific programs seem to have made the most difference?
Well, early on, CIT began to serve as that platform before I witnessed police departments really acknowledging and facilitating the stigma. You know, it's a stigma across the board. And so here in Miami-Dade County, what we've done is we've definitely looked across the nation for best practices and models. And some of our larger police departments like Miami Beach PD has a wonderful peer program, police officers helping police officers. We also have, at a larger scale, we have Miami-Dade Police Department that has their own in-house therapist just for law enforcement, but and their families. They choose not to go that route. You know, they can always fall back on using me as a resource. So slowly but surely, we're finding that now many police departments are modeling other best practices and police departments and developing their own programs. And we also collaborate here with law enforcement and our mental health professionals to provide greater resources for police officers.
And Hopsy, if she'll talk about it real quick, also did a training just for police chiefs and also for the 9/11 call takers. And we incorporate some of this with them. So,
yes, thank you, Judge. Yes, across the board, we offer all type of training for all levels of law enforcement and those that are out in the community. And so, yes, we always make sure that we speak about mental health, but I truly thought that I was coming in to teach law enforcement, and they too have been my greatest teachers. I realized that they too were in crisis, especially now. How do we expect our officers to perform at their very best and safest with everything that is going on all levels at this time in our nation?
Thank you. Next question, this might be an easy one. Does the police department have a white paper on implementation? Because that could be real useful for others who want to implement similar programs.
Yes. So we do have, for example, our sheriff's department is our largest, and we did recently obtain a BJA, Bureau of Justice Assistance grant on police and mental health collaboration. And that has truly helped us to move forward with projects and documentation, white papers that can assist other agencies as well. So, of course, also CIT International .org is a great organization to reach out to, and they can provide a number of resources as well as far as our model and best practice.
That's a nice plug, Happy. Okay, shifting a little bit back to the topic of stigma. A member of the audience writes that an expert in mental health field once said that the term brain disease rather than mental illness provides a clearer way of looking at the issue. And so perhaps something as simple as changing the terminology could change the way people think about the folks that you're working with and influence them to be more positive and towards changes in the criminal justice system. So what do you all think about the power of language?
Well, we know words matter, and we are always reviewing language within our agency and within our organization to be more sensitive and more recovery oriented. And we've seen this, I think, across the board in Miami-Dade County with the jail, with law enforcement in the community. I don't see too many people. When I first started 16 years ago, we used to call them mentals, psychs. Those terms aren't being used anymore. I think a lot of people have become aware that language does matter. And I think now we refer to them as persons that we're serving, program participants. Every agency has its own name, but it also touches on destigmatizing. The way we decriminalize is with collaboration from the state, and they really help our program participants get more leniency or a better outcome in court. And what that helps is with school, work, and home housing. If you have convictions on your record, you're definitely stigmatized. If you were arrested, you have a serious mental illness, and now you have a conviction on your record, everything becomes more difficult. So our team has really taken that as something to consider, as well as the language we use.
Yes, language is so important. Just thinking about lawyers and doctors referring to people at times as cases. We do it the same in our community. And what we've done, I've found with CIT training, is when we have peers come in and speak to our officers and tell their story, it humanizes that person, right? So we fear mental illness, and that's a lack of understanding. So when we humanize it, it changes the way not only law enforcement, but anyone perceives a person with mental illness, and now we see them as a person and not a schizophrenic. The same with law enforcement. As we cross-train, we absolutely we are so ahead in Miami-Dade County with training law enforcement that, our focus, of course, is also educating the community, because we've been humanizing the badge, making them persons. They're not robots. They feel, they have anxiety, they have PTSD, many of them, or some of them. So humanizing people helps us to see them as human beings. And yes, absolutely, language is everything.
Yeah, I love the idea of changing the term to brain illness or disease. I think it would help. And I do want to add something that the city of Miami has done incredibly well that has helped change the culture and the proper way to refer to these cases. If you're a new police officer at the city of Miami, you cannot go out on patrol on your alone yet until you've gone riding with the CIT officer. And so you learn from the beginning the proper way to refer to people with these illnesses, how we treat people with these illnesses, and it has changed the entire department's culture on how we deal with this issue.
Yeah, I know that's a really important component of the program that I learned about. And I think about the training evaluations I've done of various policing initiatives, and how we often hear that, especially with academy training, you get assigned your first 6 months on the job, and whoever you're assigned to says, okay, forget about whatever you learned in academy. This is how it really works. So teaming them up with someone who's trained in CIT, I think, is a stroke of brilliance, to be sure. The next two questions are, I think, two different individuals getting at the same issue, and that's the structural racism that exists and it pervades every aspect of society, and certainly when it comes to the criminal justice system and mental illness. A member of the audience recognized that the majority of jails are filled with African American men who are suffering from various types of brain diseases. And another member of the audience wanted to know how your program is addressing Black and Brown community members who experience significant discrimination and lack of access to treatment, and both in society in general and in the criminal justice system.
So I appreciate the question because it's incredibly important. Not only is there an overrepresentation of people of color in the criminal justice system, there is a huge overrepresentation of people with mental illnesses of color in the criminal justice system. And so it's complex in that I believe in many ways we have put police officers in positions to deal with societal issues that they don't have a solution to generally. And it's added to a lot of the frustration out there. And so I really believe there's an opportunity now to re-envision the role of society and not dumping some of these societal issues onto law enforcement. But it's also critically important that we recognize that there is systematic racism in the criminal justice system. And it's not just that someone may or may not be a racist, the system itself has tended towards some discriminatory practices that we have to recognize. And even in the mental health system, it's equally important that we have culturally competent treatment so that we get better results. One of my mentors said there's no such thing as a treatment-resistant person, there's only treatment-resistant programs. And so it's up to us to start to develop better programs that address individual needs culturally and otherwise. And we have become very in tune. Our staff is very diverse. And so we have been really good about trying to address it from our side. But a lot of work needs to be done. I really think that we should probably be bringing in more mental health professionals to be responding to some of these calls, maybe as co-responders with police, and allowing police to be more as a backup to a case that may have more violence. Transporting someone with an illness in handcuffs in a police car to go get treatment, to me, is horrifying. It's an embarrassment. It makes it harder for families to want to call for help. It makes it harder for the individual to want to get treatment because they've been so embarrassed and traumatized through the experience. So we need to rethink this entire process. And we've seen amazing results. Look, I'm not going to sit here and say we started this program to do this. It has happened as a result of the program. But we understand that we still have a long way to go as well. And our whole country does. And I think the first step we have to take is just recognizing. I read an amazing article, and I don't want to get off topic, but I want people to think about this a minute. When the GI Bill came out, which my dad, was able to buy a house and go to college on, they gave all the money to the states. And those same opportunities were not available for African-American veterans who had risked their lives and died in war. And an entire generation lost the ability to achieve wealth and income by buying property, having educational opportunities. And so we have to think about it more broadly, why people are in the situations. And there's a lot of issues that surround that, and understanding those issues help us start to rethink what we should be doing.
Yeah, I just have one follow-up question for whoever can answer it, because, if you watch the documentary, I mean, some parts of it look diverse and other parts not so much. Maybe because like one of the stars happens to be a young white man. Do you feel like, have you looked at your data to see whether there's disproportionate access to diversion for white people versus other people of color?
So we do keep data. I also chair the Florida Supreme Court's Committee on Problem-Solving Courts, and we are now implementing standards for all these different problem-solving courts. And we have a requirement of equity in the standards, and we have to keep data. And we not only keep data, we have to show that our outcomes are the same for all people of color. And so that's how we're going to—
You mean for all people? Yeah.
Yes. I mean, black, brown, white, everybody has to— we have to show that we're getting the same outcomes for every different group. And that's going to force all of our courts in Florida to make sure that we're addressing these issues systematically.
Okay, we have one last question from the audience, and then we're going to have to wrap it up. This went by so quickly. So this is for any member of the team, maybe someone we haven't heard from as much, perhaps, I don't know. Do you think it is possible to easily translate this program to the federal criminal justice system? The member of the audience notes that there's only one federal behavioral health court in the entire country, and part of the hurdle towards implementation seems to be a concern that the successful state and county-based models can't be readily applied in the federal context. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I guess I'll take this one because I'll try and respond as I can in this one. At least for Florida, when you're dealing with federal cases compared to state cases, the kind of cases that are being committed by people as a consequence of their mental illness or kind of connected to their mental illness are generally not the types of cases that are committed on a federal level. It's burglarizing a house, it's trespassing, it's a possession of cocaine, a petty theft or a grand theft from stealing something. Those are the types of cases that our individuals are coming into the program on, the burglaries of curtilage or a car or something like that. And these are more crimes of convenience, that they're things that happen more because somebody's trying to get money to get a controlled substance to deal with their addiction, to feed their addiction, or it's more driven by the mental illness. Generally, when you're dealing with, at least for Florida, because most of our federal cases in Florida are more sophisticated crimes, burglaries, more violent crimes, possessions of firearms by convicted felon, which are not necessarily charges that are what you consider more for this type of program. Like I said, when we look at this program and when we're considering putting somebody in felony mental health or misdemeanor mental health diversion, we're looking at somebody who's not, whose behavior is affected by their mental illness. And we want to assist them to become better citizens, better individuals. I had done an internship at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and a lot of the cases that I dealt with when I was at the university or at the U.S. Attorney's Office were very different than the types of individuals that we're seeing in felony mental health diversion. So it's kind of dealing with a different grouping in a different class. If you're talking about Washington, D.C., or if you're talking about, some of the Indian reservations or where they have the federal courts that deal with more the petty crimes or the lesser sophisticated crimes, then yes, that can work. But when you're dealing with, just generally speaking, the federal crimes, it doesn't quite match up.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I'm sure, Judge, you have something to share. We at the Urban Institute have done a fair amount of research on the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and there's certainly no lack of mental health or brain disease among that population. Judge?
I agree, and I think also I'd like to see the federal government work to try to scale this program nationally in the state court system. In fact, thanks to the Ornsteins and through the attention of the documentary, we've actually been working with several members of Congress just this week, and they're looking at putting legislation together to see how they can scale what we've done here throughout the country, both federal and state systems.
Terrific, thanks. So now it's time for wrap up. I'm going to ask each panelist to give one piece of advice. So I imagine that a lot of our viewers are on this to learn more because they want to either adapt or expand an existing program like JDP, or maybe start one from scratch. So you're talking to an eager audience that wants to know, what one piece of advice do you have? And we're going to start in reverse order than what we did previously. So we'll start with Habsi.
Well, since I'm representing CIT, I absolutely want to recommend our CIT International Guide. You can access it again at citinternational.org. And this is a wealth of knowledge and information for all communities, whether you are just beginning to implement a program or are far along. I strongly urge you that you look into that guide for further guidance on CIT. Thank you.
Thanks, Habsi. Sergeant Blackerby.
An idea can be a very profound thing, and I think that the pushback that people will give for a new idea can really be incredibly harmful. This idea, this concept that's been developed, that Judge Leifman and Habsi and all of us have been such a great part of, is an idea that more agencies really should adopt. They should take a good hard look at it. And there's been obviously the discussion here has been largely that of dealing with individuals who are in mental crisis. But one of the powerful benefits of the CIT program is that what you're getting from it is genuinely a kinder, gentler police department. And when you're dealing with an individual who's simply angry, they're not in mental crisis, but you have a culture within the agency that can provide these people with an outlet. Maybe you have a CIT officer who is there to deal with someone who's just angry. You have a more powerful tool to de-escalate that entire scene. So this program is not just for people who are in mental crisis. This is for your entire city. This is for your entire county. These are for the people whom we serve. So that's why I think the idea is a good one. Take it and run with it.
Thank you for that. Alejandro.
I'd have to say you have to get a good set of tires because it's a bumpy ride. But I will say, I think I always want communities to familiarize themselves with the sequential intercept model. It's a conceptual model. It's designed to assist cities and counties in determining how people with mental illness and substance use disorders flow from the community to the criminal justice system and then eventually return to the community. And I would suggest that everybody create a local strategic plan, base it on the gaps you find in your system and the resources you have in your community, and then prioritize, identify where your priorities lie.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to provide an addendum to that, which is find yourself a good grant writer, because there are resources from the federal government and the Bureau of Justice Assistance that can help you get you started. Let's turn it over to Jenny.
I tried to think of the best advice that I could give. And to be honest, I think it's communication. And I think that's one of the things that has allowed our program to be so successful, is that we do communicate, and not just with the court or in court, but the public defender, the assistant public defender who works in the program, and all the public defenders and the private attorneys. We do have an open dialogue, and the team, we all work together. It really truly is a team where we are all working together towards the same goal. I've worked with Alejandro for years in the diversion court, and I trust him, and I know if he's coming to me to talk to me about something, there's a real reason for that, you know, and I think the fact that we are so willing to communicate allows us to have different perspectives and to really figure out the best way to reach all the goals, which is really to protect the community. And I think that's the most important thing, is communication.
So, right. So communication and collaboration, and
Yes.
everyone having a shared and vested interest in
Yes.
success. Thank you. Well, you know, I flipped the order for a reason, because I thought it was only appropriate to give Judge Leifman the last word here. And you have like 5 minutes if you want it to wrap things up. What's your advice?
I appreciate it. The first thing I would say is, don't be overwhelmed. Just start. We joke, but we like to say we're a 20-year overnight success. We built over a long period of time, and we started slow. And the other piece of this that you need to understand, or the audience needs to understand, I know you understand, you don't have to rebuild your entire system to fix this. There is a small subset of individuals with serious mental illnesses that are accessing most of the resources. And so we did a study a few years ago through the University of South Florida. We sent them the names of 3,300 people that had been arrested in Miami-Dade that we knew had mental illnesses, and they have the capacity to tell a community who the highest utilizers of criminal justice and mental health services are. And we thought, hey, if they can narrow it to 1,000 people, we can start to direct our resources to 1,000. You know, we have 3 million plus another million of tourists here a year. We could handle 1,000 people. Shockingly, they narrowed it down to 97 people, primarily men, primarily diagnosed with schizoaffective or schizophrenia type disorder, primarily homeless, and primarily co-occurring, meaning they had a substance use disorder. These 97 people were arrested over a 5-year period 2,200 times. They spent 27,000 days in the Dade County Jail. They spent 13,000 days at a community or state psychiatric, state-funded facility, cost taxpayers $14.7 million, and we got nothing for it. And so if you start your program by focusing on the high utilizers, you get an immediate financial impact and a public safety impact, which then allows you to start to move some of those resources to the front end of the system to help this from repeating itself. And so to follow up what Alejandro was saying, the first thing I would suggest you do, and you can do it through a BJA or a Samsa grant, is to have a summit. And I would suggest that you select a state attorney, the public defender, maybe a sheriff, a police chief, the mayor, or a judge, and have them be the focal point to invite the parties to the table. You need to have someone, you know, the other thing we joke about is it's good to be judged because people come to our meetings even if they don't want to be there. So you need someone that can do that. And then I would suggest that you have an outside facilitator, not someone from in the community, who's an expert in these areas that could help facilitate. And then what you need to do, like Alejandro suggested, is map out the system, because every community is different. There's not a single switch to fix this. And so you're going to have better and worse things in your own community. And once you've identified these gaps, what we did, which I strongly recommend, is we put together a written collaborative agreement that all the important stakeholders, these were elected officials, heads of agencies, came into my chambers. They signed this document, put their name on this document, promising that they would make these systematic changes. We picked an arbitrary date, I think it was April of 2000, and we just began. And it has resulted in changing everything from the screening tools at the jail to having a process to move this population, to do better assessments and get all the providers to agree to take this population. Our Department of Corrections acts as our Department of Transportation. We figured it all out over time, and it works. And the thing to remember is, look, it's not nefarious. It's not one person or one party or one institution that created this. This has been a perfect storm for a bunch of issues. And if anything, this pandemic and this better understanding of some of our racial disparity issues that have come up, it's given us a time to reset. And I think the worst thing that we could do is go back to the system that didn't work. That is enormously expensive, enormously painful, enormously counterproductive, and start to implement changes like this that just work for everybody. And you know, I couldn't be prouder of the people I work with, the people that are on this panel. Look, I get a lot of credit for having a vision, but I never could have done it without the amazing staff and people that work with us that really are so committed to these individuals, whether it's a police officer or my peers or the amazing folks that you see here today. They change lives every day and they save lives every day. And the worst thing you can do is not do this. If you want to save money, improve your public safety, address some of these really difficult issues you have there, this is the way to go about doing it.
So Judge, you mentioned the summit and you mentioned key stakeholders, but one category of stakeholder you didn't mention, and I expect you to agree, is people who have experienced mental illness, experienced the criminal justice system, and experienced recovery so that they can share their own recovery stories with these other key, mostly criminal justice stakeholders. Would you agree with that?
You know, I've been doing this so long, I think of them as part of our team. So 100%.
Good.
And they were in on the original summit. We had family members, we had people with lived experiences, we had everybody at the table. And, you know, we call some folks traditional stakeholders and non-traditional stakeholders. And all of those people had to be in the room to make all of this happen. Because part of it's an educating process by going through it and understanding these illnesses. The other quick thing that we didn't do, if you were to ask me, what would you do different? The only thing I would have been done different at the time is I would have invited child psychiatrists, pediatricians, and school board members to have been part of the summit. And the reason we didn't do it is because new science has come out since. And what we know is that trauma is a huge contributor to this population. 92% of all the women in jail and prisons in the United States with serious mental illnesses were sexually abused as children. And about 75% of men who are in jail and prisons with these serious mental illnesses also have very serious histories of trauma. We should be using assessment tools like ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and we should be assessing all middle-aged kids, identifying trauma and getting them treated. We could have kept 2 generations out of our system already if we had started this 20 years ago. And so when you're doing your summit, the other non-traditional stakeholders should be the kids, and let's get ahead of the curve and keep them from growing into our system.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. We're just about on time to hand it back to Marcia for closing remarks.
Nancy, thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone on this panel. Your passion around the Jail Diversion Initiative is contagious. I look forward personally to learning more about it, to hopefully watching it spread across the nation. And I also welcome each of you to Washington, D.C., to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial and Museum as my guest. Just knock on the door, tell them you're here, and we will welcome you in. So thank you very much. In closing, I would like to invite each of you to join us on July 14th for our next event. It will be held in conjunction with our release of our mid-year law enforcement fatality report. During that program, we will explore where officers are most vulnerable to injury and fatality, and best practices for officer safety. So again, thank you, and thank you to our sponsor, Target, and we will see you in a few weeks. Have a great day.